Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Rubin speaking to you from just east of Jerusalem. Today is the 15th day of the month of Sivan, 5782. It's June 14th, 2022. This coming Shabbat we are reading Parashat Shlach, or sometimes Shlach Lecha, meaning send for yourself, send forth for yourself, send if you please. We're going to be talking about what that all might mean in just a few minutes. Shlach Lecha is one of the most difficult parashot, difficult Torah readings, because it is an unparalleled disaster in the history of Israel. It's in many ways even more calamitous than the sin of the golden calf. And how did we get here? How did Israel get to this place? Things were going so well. And the land of Israel was just so near. How did Israel find itself in this predicament? We're going to be talking about it in just a few minutes. I want to mention that yesterday, for the first time in quite some time, I went up to the Temple Mount. I brought a friend up, first time on the Temple Mount for him. I posted some photographs that I took up there with a little inset, a little legend or key, which will show you exactly on the mount where the photos were taken, and with a little explanation for many of the pictures, many of the photos. I hope that if you have a chance, you'll look at it and find it enjoyable and useful to help familiarize yourselves with the topography of the Temple Mount then and now. It was a beautiful day. And in the afternoon, there's usually not too large a number of people going up, but we had a nice group. In fact, we merged with a group which went up just a few minutes after we did, and together we made a very nice number of people. We prayed Mincha, the afternoon prayers. We stood along the eastern edge of the Temple Mount, due east of the place where the Holy Temple stood, just outside of the outer gate, which would lead into the Ezrat Nashim, into the women's court, if the women's court were existing today. It will one day. And there we prayed Mincha. And what was unprecedented for me, first time that I've been up there when the police actually didn't rush us off by 2:30, because the official hour for Jews and Gentiles in the afternoon is from 1:30 to 2:30. And usually the police are very, very concerned that you're off by 2:30. And for some reason yesterday, they didn't rush us. And I think we were up there about an extra 20 minutes, which means all in all, we're about an hour and 20 minutes up on the Temple Mount, which I've never experienced those extra 20 minutes before. I was with somebody else who also asked someone else who was up there who goes up every day, and he says it's not so unusual these days for the police to give you a little more time up there. Again, neither the police nor the government of Israel will ever admit that anything's changed, but things have changed, and the most positive news is that they're continuing to change in a positive way in terms of Jewish presence and prayer on the Temple Mount, and that bodes well. There are other things happening on the Temple Mount that aren't so positive, as the Muslims continue to make every effort to commandeer new areas of the Temple Mount and declare that they are mosques or holy only to Muslims, whatever. But as far as Jewish presence and prayer, things continue to move in a positive direction, as the numbers, of course, if you've been following, have been rising dramatically. So that is concerning my trip, my aliyah, my ascension to the Temple Mount yesterday. Yesterday I also posted some photographs of some new kelim, some new vessels that the Temple Institute has received as a donation by an interested party who donated the money that went into producing these two kelim, these two vessels, which are the mizrakim. These are the vessels which the kohanim, the temple priests, held, which they caught the blood in when they slaughtered an animal, and then carried this mizrak to the altar, and the blood was dashed on the altar, on the side of the altar. And they, in temple times, some were made out of gold and some made out of silver. We produced two new. We have in our collection already mizrakim for this same purpose, but we now have an extra set, which is always good to have. You never know when you're going to need one. That temple's going to be built one day, and we're going to need extra sets. So now we have an extra set, silver and gold. The gold is actually silver with gold plating, which the gold plating in itself was very, very expensive, because gold is quite expensive these days. But and a solid gold vessel like that just couldn't hold itself together because gold is very soft material, very soft metal. So it's made out of silver with gold plating. Very, very beautiful. I took photos, posted them yesterday on Facebook, and I invite you to have a look. I just want to also mention at this time that Temple Talk, which you may be connecting to via our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, is also available on Spotify and on Deezer. There's also a Facebook podcast, which Facebook was promoting very vigorously until a couple of months ago, when they seemed to have abandoned their program. So we were getting very nice numbers of listeners on Facebook, and that's pretty much evaporated. But if you haven't heard, once again, we're on Spotify and Deezer, and another good platform from which to listen to Temple Talk, and also our Rav Gedalia's weekly Torah study of the weekly Parsha, weekly Torah reading. So let's go right now into Parshat Shlach, which begins the book of Numbers 13:1, concludes chapter 15, verse 41. And if you recall, we left off last week after a series of what the modern Hebrew would be, fadichot, a series of bad things that happened after things were going so well. We spent the first few chapters in the book of Numbers reading about the organization of the encampment, about the inauguration of the tabernacle, about the gifts brought to the tabernacle by the 12 tribal leaders, about Aaron kindling the menorah for the first time, etc., etc. We learned about the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, all these wonderful things and descriptions of how Israel would travel in the wilderness with HaShem, with the tabernacle, and how the cloud would rise up, the cloud of glory rise up from the tabernacle, signaling to Israel it's time to move on, at which point Kohanim would blast their trumpets, and the entire encampment of Israel would work together in unison beautifully to move forward. The Levites who were encamped right around the tabernacle would then disassemble the tabernacle and wrap things up in beautiful cloths of techelet, of the blue and the purple, and goat skins, etc., etc., and travel until Hashem signaled that it's time to rest again and set up the camp again. It's all beautiful, and it's all wonderful, and the land of Canaan, the land of Canaan, Israel, is within reach. It's just days away, maybe weeks away. But they're marching toward Canaan. They're marching toward Canaan. They're marching toward the promised land. And then a series of not so flattering events began to happen in last week's Parsha Ba'alotcha. There were the complainers who had nothing to complain about, so they came up with something, and that was they didn't like the food anymore. I mean, it's like the basic human complaint, basic child's complaint. I mean, it's a childish thing. We don't like the food anymore. We're tired of the man. We want some meat. We want the stuff we had back in Egypt. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, Israel gets nostalgic for an Egypt that really never existed. They didn't have it so wonderfully in Egypt. They were slaves. They ate what they were given to eat. They were given what to eat, what would enable them to continue to work. But nostalgia is a tricky thing, and we often remember things not as they were, but as we imagine them to have been. And oftentimes nostalgia comes in when we're uncertain about our future. And then we start to dream and glorify our past, our distant past, and say, wow, it was really good. So as Israel was getting closer to the land and entering the land was imminent, it seems they were getting cold feet. Something was disturbing Israel. So you had the complaining of the food, and then and which just caused Moshe to, he had had enough. He basically, that was it. He said to God, just kill me, God. I can't take this people anymore. And God said, no, Moshe, it's okay. This one's on me. You think I can't find food? I can find food. So God brings them these pheasants and feeds them pheasants for an entire month until they're so sick of the pheasants. They're sick from the pheasants. And then, of course, we have some other problems, finally culminating with the whole confrontation between Miriam and Aaron, the sister and brother of Moshe, who have a complaint about a Cushite woman who he never heard of before. And HaShem, now it's HaShem's turn to be really offended. HaShem is offended on Moshe's behalf. It's so sweet, so beautiful. HaShem is offended on Moshe's behalf, and he really lets Aaron and Miriam have it for their chutzpah, for their nerve, their gall. In questioning Moshe, who are you, he says. There's nobody like Moshe. He's the most faithful servant in my house. I speak to Moshe face to face, mouth to mouth. And Moshe is the most modest man on earth, which is how it is that I can approach him and that he can receive from me, because his modesty doesn't put anything in between us. There's no ego in Moshe, which blocks my communication with him. Anyway, that is how last week's parsha ends. And this week begins chapter 13, verse 1, in Hebrew, then in English. וידבר השם אל משה לאמור שלח לך אנשים ויתורו את ארץ כנען אשר אני נותן לבני ישראל איש אחד למטה אבותיו תשלחו כל נשיא בהם. וישלח אותם משה ממדבר פרן על פי השם כולם אנשים ראשי בני ישראל המה. ואלה שמותם etc., etc., and they're the names. So Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, send forth men, if you please. I'm going to explain that if you please in just a moment. And let them spy out the land of Canaan that I give to the children of Israel. One man from each of his father's tribes shall you send, each one a leader among them. Moshe sent them forth from the wilderness of Paran at Hashem's command. They were all distinguished men, the heads of the children of Israel, or they, and then it goes on to name each of the 12 spies, meraglim they're called in Hebrew. They're not really ever referred to here as meraglim, but the name stuck in the tradition, meraglim, and they named the 12 people, and among the 12 are, and these are really the only ones worth remembering, and they are Kalev, in English you say Caleb, Kalev ben Yefuneh from the tribe of Judah, and Hoshea ben Nun from the tribe of Ephraim. And Hoshea, we read, as soon as after they're named, it says in verse 16, these are the names of the men whom Moshe sent to spy out the land. Moshe called Hoshea, son of Nun bin Nun, Yehoshua, Joshua. So Joshua and Caleb, Kalev, they're the ones you want to keep in mind because, spoiler alert, as I'm sure you already know, they are the only dissenting opinion of the 12 spies when they do return. So what's the big deal with send forth men if you please? Shlach lecha is how it's said in Hebrew, which means literally send to yourself or send for yourself. Remember way back in Genesis when God first spoke to Avraham, whose name at the time was Avram, and he said, Lech lecha, go to the land I'm going to show you. Lech lecha, which means go to yourself, go for yourself. It's sort of an invitation to a new world. Lech lecha, go into yourself, explore your spiritual self in this land I'm going to show you. Here, the lecha, which is the same word, is interpreted differently, and it's very interesting. So the literal translation would be shalach lecha, send for yourself. Why does it say send for yourself? HaShem seems to be giving a commandment here. Send men who will yaturu, it says spy out the land in English, but they weren't really spies. They were sort of on a fact-finding mission. They were just going to there to find out what the topography was and what the people were like and what the cities were like. Moshe explains to them exactly what he's looking for. So HaShem, it sounds like a commandment, but the lecha is interpreted by our sages as, if you feel you need to send them, go ahead. I'm approving. I'm giving the green light. If you want to do this, if you feel it's necessary, because as far as HaShem's concerned, the people are going into the land and they're going to get the land. HaShem promised it to Israel. So why do they need to go ahead and spy it out and come back with a report and say, is it a good land? Is it as fruitful as HaShem has been suggesting all along, or is it not? What are the people like? Why do they need to know this? This is a question. And because it's a question, there's a question as whose idea was it? So the traditional interpretation given to these lines is that it wasn't exactly HaShem's idea. Suggesting that maybe it was Moshe's idea, which is very interesting. But if we take a moment and go to the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim in Hebrew, chapter 1. Moshe, and the book of Deuteronomy is Moshe talking in first person. It's a recap of the entire 40 years experience in the wilderness. And he says in chapter 1 of the book of Deuteronomy, verse 21 begins like this: Behold, HaShem your God has set the land before you. Go up and possess it, as the Shem, your God of your fathers, has spoken to you. You shall neither fear nor be dismayed. Right? This is, again, putting us right back in the same time slot as our parsha today, Shalach, in the beginning of the second year in the wilderness. And then back to Deuteronomy, verse 22. And all of you approached me and said, let us send men ahead of us, so that they will search out the land and bring us back word by which route we shall go up and to which cities we shall come. And the matter pleased me, so I took 12 men from you, 1 man for each tribe. Okay, so according to Moshe's version, the people approached Moshe and they said, let's do this. Like we can't wait to get into the land, but let's do it, rationally. Let's do it intelligently. Let's send some people ahead to tell us which is the best route to go in. Why take our chances? Which is the best route, which is the cities that we shall come to first to conquer, ostensibly. So it seems like it's with so much confidence, and Moshe likes the idea. So, the matter pleased me, right? So according to Moshe, the idea came from the people, which does not contradict what we read in Parshat Shlach, but it's a little more specific. And interestingly enough, however, Parshat Shlach doesn't say specifically that it came from the people. It just says Shlach Lecha. So the thing is, this seems to be a chet, this seems to be a sin, a crime, a misdeed that nobody wants to take credit for. Moshe doesn't, he's not, they came to him, and God's saying in Parshat Shlach Lecha, if you want to do it, you got my blessing, but it's not my idea. Whose idea was it? It's very interesting that there's this horrible, horrible incident, which is a history changer. To this day, the Chet Meraglim, which means the sin of the spies, haunts us, haunts Israel, historically has haunted us, and in our psyche it continues to haunt us. And the reason it haunts us is because, and the reason HaShem in Parshat Shlach was so unbelievably outraged by this, much more so than by the sin of the golden calf, is because it showed a lack of trust, a lack of faith in HaShem. The Cheta Egel Hazahav, the sin of the golden calf, it wasn't that the people didn't trust Hashem, didn't have faith in Hashem. The people, they didn't have discipline. they just, they went off and they lost it, and they made this golden calf, but it wasn't an expression of rejection of Hashem's word or promise. It was they panicked because Moshe was gone. They didn't think he was going to come back. And what are we going to do now? This is much different. Hashem has been saying, consistently, I'm going to take you into that land. It's a land that's flowing with milk and honey. It's a land that's a beautiful land. And you're going to take over. You're going to conquer it. He didn't say, he didn't promise him a rose garden, as in, you're going to walk in and the people are going to give you the keys and say, we've been waiting for you. No, you have to conquer it. But that's what all this preparation is about, turning the nation into creating an army and a proper encampment and learning how to move forward together and to advance together. It's all for the preparation of going into the land. And so the spies go up, the 12, again, not spies, but the 12 notables, the 12 VIPs, 12 celebrities. They were big names. And that may have been part of the problem, is that they had too much of themselves involved in this mission. It was an ego trip, perhaps. They were thinking more about what's going to happen to them when they go into the land. Are they going to still be, in charge? Are they still going to be the leaders? Or are other people going to be the leaders? Once the people get in the land and they settle down, and then you have, you have agriculture, and you have to raise your own crops for your own food, and the army has to fight to conquer cities, etc. You might not be the tribal celebrity anymore. That may have been what was so frightening to these 12 men. But here's the thing. Moshe, he sent them out to spy the land of Canaan. I'm reading now. That was verse 17. And he said to them, ascend here in the south and climb the mountain. See the land. How is it? And the people that dwells in it. Is it strong or weak? Is it few or numerous? And how is the land in which it dwells? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which it dwells? Are they open or are they fortified? And how is the land? Is it fertile or is it lean? Are there trees in it or not? You shall strengthen yourselves and take from the fruit of the land. The days were the season of the first ripe grapes. So Moshe has a lot of questions he wants them to answer. And again, it's curious. God's been saying it's a beautiful land, flowing with milk and honey, a land of all these, of dates and pomegranates and olives and wheat and barley and et cetera, et cetera. So why do you have to find these things out? And it almost seems maybe they just were saying, what, let's be responsible adults now. We're going to go into the land, and God's been, he's been coddling us all throughout this first year in the wilderness, treating us with kid gloves, giving us whatever we ask for. But, maybe it's time, if we're really going in, maybe it's time to grow up. Maybe it's time to be adults. So let's plan this out. You take out your pen and your paper. What should we ask? What should we look for? So Moshe has all these things that he's asking him to look for. But really, do they need to look for that? I mean, is the land lean? The land's not going to be lean. The land is going to be beautiful. God promised them that. So it's very interesting. What is this all about? Okay, so they go. And picking up in verse 20, when they ascended and spied out the land from the wilderness of Sin to the expanse at the approach to Hamat, they ascended in the south and arrived at Hebron, where there were Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the offspring of the giant. Hebron had been built 7 years before, son of Egypt. They arrived at the valley of Eshcol and cut from there a vine with one cluster of grapes and bore it on a double pole, and of the pomegranates and of the figs. Okay, so that's a famous image. We know the famous image of the two Israelites with a large stick between them, or a branch, a pole on their shoulders, and this huge cluster of grapes, showing the absolute richness of the land. When they came back with that to the people, to the Israelites in the wilderness, that should have been, the green light. Like, wow, look at those grapes. We want to go there. We want more of those grapes. So they came back and they showed everybody the fruit, and obviously everybody is very impressed. And then they started to report to Moshe in front of the entire assembly, which was another mistake in my opinion. Moshe should have gathered them together. They could have sat together, Moshe and the 12 notables who came back, and he could say, what can you tell me? And then they could have told him, if they had said, listen, we're not so sure we can do it. They look really strong there. They're giants there, and we're tiny people. Moshe could have said, okay, let's work this out. Of course we're going to conquer the land. So let's present it properly to the people to, get them revved up for this, to get them all psyched up. But he didn't. They spoke directly to the entire assembly of Israel, which proved to be disastrous. Now, but the interesting thing is, for the most part, they reported that the land is beautiful, and they had the fruit to prove it. The things that they were afraid of were these giants, who, they mentioned the Nephilim, that these giants were the descendants of the Nephilim. If you recall, the Nephilim are these mythical beings way back from the generation of Noah, or just before Noah. These Nephilim that started to populate the earth, and were mating with the daughters of man. So there's all different midrashim and all different traditions about who these Nephilim were. Were they fallen angels, and what it was all about? But apparently, their offspring, who in the book of Genesis says the offspring were the ancient heroes, the ancient, strong men of antiquity, or even antiquity back in Noah's day. So that's something that may really have given the shivers to these 12 Israelites, that they thought that, wow, these people are still here and they're in the land of Israel, and that's where we're supposed to go. Yeah, they were giants. Kiryat Arba, which is another name for Hebron. Kiryat Arba means a city of the four. And it refers to the four giants that are mentioned there. And other than that, they also mention that Amalek is there. It's not going to be easy. That's clear. But they mention all this, and then they say this horrible, horrible things. Then they start to say the dibah. And the dibah is the dibata aretz is the slander. They slandered the land that God promised them. They slandered it. They said bad things about it. They didn't just bring back facts. Up till now, it's been facts and impressions. But now they say this, verse 31, still in chapter 13. But the men who had ascended with him, going back a little bit more. After they mention the offsprings of the giants and the Amalek, and it's getting a little bit scary, Kalev silenced the people toward Moshe and said, we shall surely ascend it and conquer it, for we can surely do it. Like Kalev is full of confidence and faith and trust in HaShem. But the men, now I'm in verse 31. But the men who had ascended with him said, we cannot ascend to that people, for it is too strong for us. They brought forth to the children of Israel an evil report, dibah Dibata Aretz, on the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have passed to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. Where'd they come up with this? Devours its inhabitants? They're talking about inhabitants that are giants, that are scary. It devours its inhabitants. They're talking about themselves. They're projecting their fears onto the landscape of Israel. And then it says this, all the people we saw were huge. There we saw the Nephilim. I mentioned that in Minigo, the sons of the giants from among the Nephilim. We were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and so we were in their eyes. So they got completely intimidated by what they saw. And they felt like grasshoppers. I mean, that's as low as you can get, right? Grasshoppers, they felt like, and in our eyes, saying, nobody came along. No giant approached them and said, who are you clowns? Who are you little people? You look like grasshoppers. No, they imagined all this. They projected it. They got frightened. And they said to themselves, ooh, we're like grasshoppers, and that's how they must see us. You know, for all we know, these Nephilim and these sons of the Nephilim and these giants, they might have said, wow, who are those people, those Israelites? We've heard about them. HaShem is with them. HaShem has brought them out of Egypt, the strongest country in the world. HaShem has brought them through the wilderness. He split the sea for them. He gave them the law at Sinai. Wow, they're really scary. You know, that may be how these giants were thinking. The 12 Israelites didn't know. They projected. And when they projected all this, they caused a sudden, total breakdown of the will of the Israelites. And everybody began to cry. And worst of all, they said, let us appoint a leader and let us return to Egypt. And Moshe and Aaron they don't know what to do. They fall on their faces. And then Yoshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Yefuneh, of the spies of the land, tore their garments. They spoke to the entire assembly of the children of Israel, saying, the land that we passed through to spy it out, the land is very, very good. Tov ma'od ma'od in Hebrew. You know, HaShem, when he completed the sixth day of creation, he said, it is tov ma'od, very good. This is even better than the sixth day of creation. This is tov ma'od ma'od. That's how good the land is. If Hashem desires it, if Hashem desires us, he will bring us to this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. But do not rebel against Hashem. You should not fear the people of the land, for they are our bread, right? They're our bread and butter. We're just going to take them. They're the opposite. They have the opposite attitude of the other 10 spies. Their protection has departed from them. Hashem is with us. Do not fear. Very interesting that by protection in Hebrew, it's their tselem. Sar Tzilam, their tselem, their image of Hashem. Tzelem Elokim is the image of Hashem that we've been created in. They said like they've lost their humanity. They've lost their divine protection. They're in our hands. We can do this. However, by this point it was too late, and we know that the entire assembly began to stone them. And then Hashem, he's had enough. And he says to Moshe, how long will this people provoke me, and how long will they not have faith in me, despite all the signs that I have performed in their midst? I will smite them with the plague and annihilate them, and I shall make you a greater and more powerful nation than they. And then Moshe pulls a card that he pulls more than once with Hashem. He says, what will the nations say? That you brought Israel out here to die, that you couldn't do it? So now it's Moshe's turn to be the adult in the room. Pardon me for saying this. And Hashem is very, very upset because they're not, all Hashem wants is Israel to have faith in him. He's done everything for them, and still they're rejecting him. So Moshe comes in, saves the day, but it's a real mess. And it's going to cost Israel another 39 years in the wilderness, as we all know. So that is the debacle, the travesty of the 12 spies who went out to spy out the land of Canaan for Israel. Thanks for being with me. Temple Talk.